This time on the laboratory, we're going to be working on a Lemax costume contest. You may have seen this before. This one has lights and sound, but no motion. If I move the one, it moves the other, and she doesn't move at all. So, it sounds... I'll bring it up. You might be able to hear it. Sounds like the motor spinning, but nothing else. So, let's take a look at this thing. Turn it off first. And this is a resin piece, in case you don't have it and you're looking for it. So it's all resin. The characters are probably a resin or plastic blend. Signs feel like resin. Great. So, anyhow, this has some broken pieces, like the two spires here and the one there. I got this as a parts house, but let's see if it's repairable. As I've mentioned in other videos, I do acquire parts houses, so I have parts to fix other houses, whether they be mine or somebody else's. So, first I'm going to do is, because this is an older piece, I noticed the mat isn't adhered very well. It's not that it wasn't adhered great when it was made, it's that the glue has broken down since it was manufactured. So I might be able to pull this off without applying any heat. I'm using a rigid spudger to help get it started. And I don't have the foam underneath it because, again, I bought this as a parts house, so I'm not too worried about damaging it. I mean, if I get it fixed, I might put it in my display. But my display, this doesn't really fit the motif that I go for. So I probably wouldn't display it, but I know other people out there have this piece, and they might have it where it doesn't function. So we're going to delve into it. So right in the center is the access, and it's almost the same shape as the stage. So I'm just going to focus my attention on removing just around the center. Looks like some of the mat is starting to stick. Again, parts house. So I'm just going to peel it off. I'm just going to peel the center off. You can see in the center we have a rectangle-ish or a house-looking piece, which matches the front of the stage here. And I see it's got hot glue. And it's yellowed. Yellow hot glue is usually really easy to pull out because it's lost its ability to stick. Alright, so I got it all broken free. That was easy. If yours sticks, you can always heat it up. And this piece was made in 2006 according to the date code on the bottom. There we go. And here's the guts. So once you get your mat off, whether you do it destructively or not, that is your choice. The characters just pop out. They have square pegs, apparently. So we'll get those out right now. We got an old school speaker. 2006, go figure. It's a much taller speaker with a much larger speaker. It's still 8 ohms, half watt. It's just the technology, you know, it gets smaller as it gets newer. It does have a really large belt. So I'm going to turn it on and see what's going on. Sounds like it's got a broken gear. It does. It's got a broken 10 tooth, which actually might be 14. I'm surprised the belt's still good. It's got some broken standoffs. I'll zoom in and show you all this here in a moment. I'm just examining how they did this. They used eccentrics to move the characters on the outer ones on the center pieces, and then the middle one is a gear drive. It's kind of unique. I wonder if the witch is supposed to spin in a circle. I'm not familiar with this piece, so if you're not, we're gonna find out together. If you are, then you already know the answer, and you can yell it at your screen, and I still won't hear it. So we're gonna work on it now. I'm gonna move this and zoom in, and I'm gonna show you what I can see, or try to see. Let me, you should be able to see it that way. So, right here, that is cracked. That's what holds this gear, which spins this gear, which is the center, the witch. And then, this is the 14 or 10 tooth. I think it's a 14. If you notice, the gap right there is larger. That's where the gear is split. And then you can see how long this belt is. We'll move it down. This thing has a very large belt. It's the entire length of this platform. And the motor is a standard 300 CA motor. I'm going to zoom out a hair so you can see. And you can also see the size of the speaker, which is, like I said, the old school where it was larger, not the new ones that are smaller. I found the larger ones seem to sound better, but that's just my opinion. So once you get this far, you got to be careful because the power wire, which one of them, the white one here, is very short and is soldered to the board. The only thing that disconnects is this white and white with red stripe, which goes to the lights right here. That's the only thing you unplug, and unplugging it is relatively pointless because with these wires being so taut from the switch and power port, you're not going to get a lot of motion. So unless you're removing the circuit board right here, which when we get this apart I'll try and tip it and show you, instead of the lights being soldered together on a string, they are on a printed board, which if the light burns out, you take the board out because it's just held in with glue, and you can desolder the pads, push that LED out, push a new one in, resolder it, cut off the excess. It's not that bad. It's actually a nice way of doing things. And if for some reason the board does go bad, you can literally just solder the LEDs in a straight line. But I don't think it's going to go bad. First thing I'm going to do is loosen the screws so I can move the speaker. Speakers, even the new ones, have notches, and you can just slide the screws out. You don't have to totally unscrew them, unless the screw goes through everything, which some of the pieces are that way. And a lot of the times this speaker is actually also glued into place, and some of the new speakers, like if you watch some of the more recent videos, there are 4 notches, and sometimes only use 3 of them, which means you have to remove one because you won't be able to slide the speaker in or out. Now this board is just held in with glue, dab, so I'm just going to work it out. Hopefully you can see the glues right there. These are the fingers that hold it. And now to get into the meat and potatoes of this guy, this top plate is held on with these 3 screws. And this top plate will give you access to the drive belt, which this belt has a lot of slack, but it still works. What I'll do is we'll change the gear, check everything out, and if this belt starts to slip because it's got so much slack, we'll replace the belt at that time. I'm going to remove the belt. Now you can see how large it is compared to more modern drive belts. Modern drive belts, such as the Headstone Mill Brewery, this would be the size of the belt that runs the paddle wheel. So, All right, to get down to level 2, we have 5 screws. This one, this one, this one, this one, this one. These 2 guys right here is what holds in your motor, and it is a 300 CA. And what's nice is the motor is above all the lubricated components. I've mentioned it many a times, and lots of folks out there, I see them in the different forums and stuff. They have the motors fail, and that's because the grease from the lubrication gets into the motor. So when the motor is down low at the level of the gears, or when this gets warm and the grease liquefies and runs, because they're at the same level, it runs into the holes or around the shaft and shorts out the motor. In turn, nothing in your house works. Least path of resistance. I just noticed that it's cracked. The stage is cracked. I can see through it. So, all right, so the 5 screws are out. I'm going to try and lift this thing off. There we go. So here's the lubrication. Here's the broken gear. It is a 10 tooth. It should just slide right off because it's broke. I might have a 10 tooth sitting right here. That is a 8 tooth. That's a 10 tooth. Slightly taller. We'll see if that makes any difference. So we'll set these aside. Now let's get down to the 3rd level. Pull my screwdriver. So on this one you have 5 screws again. And we'll check the other gears. You know, because there's gears here and there's another set of gears in the next level down. This is a very large gearbox for a small house. There we go. And we'll lift it off slowly. We have another transfer gear right here. This 10 tooth is good. And when I put it back on, this arm, just so you know, goes in right like there we go. All right, so how this works is when it transfers the energy down here, it drives this gear, which in turn drives these gears, which makes the witch spin. So the witch spins in a circle. The same gear also drives this gear here, which makes this eccentric rotate, which makes the outer 2 move back and forth. So they're kind of like the Rockettes. So if you take this apart, I don't know if you can see how much room this wobbles. These screws cannot be tight. They have to be allow some flexibility, but they are a little excessively loose. Like this screw is barely even in. So I'm going to take up some of the threads and some of the slack without putting too much tension on the bars because they won't slide. Now that I've done tensioning, it may cause the belt to slip. So what I'm doing right now is I'm just making sure that I didn't tighten anything too tight. That's the screw. That's better. I tightened that little gear too much. So check how loose your stuff is. The center screw is still too high. There we go. there's your eccentric. So if you're having a binding problem, especially on these outer two characters, your screws may be coming loose. Again, you don't want to make them so tight that they don't allow the mechanism to work. So as you tighten them, just move your item and make sure. Now, if your eccentric standoffs are cracked, you can put a dab of glue on them, probably super glue, so it can get into the crack. Kind of like this one standoff here is cracked, which is not affecting anything at the moment. Yeah, she's doing good. So those gears all look good. Now let's check out these, and then we'll get the gear replaced and reassemble it. Easiest way to check a gear is to spin them and look at the teeth. What's nice about this, other than this eccentric gear right here, which can be made if you lose or break it, these are all standard gears in a hobby kit. And this one. This one's not. So 2 of the gears aren't standard in a hobby kit. So at least this is completely rebuildable with most hobby gear kits. So let's get this bottom layer back on. Make sure that when you push this through that you don't knock your outer 2 guys' mounts. If you do, just pop it up, slide them back into place. You're good to go. So I don't lose anything, I'm going to screw this back together to ensure that nothing comes out of alignment. If you watch the Ghoulish Gourd from the week or so back, that's why I buy parts houses, because that one the circuit board got fried due to the incorrect power supply. And what I mean incorrect is it had one of those power supplies that had a little sweep arm that you could select from 2.5 to 12 volts, and it turns out, there we go, that one, it didn't seat. That was that pop, it was that seating. Now let's make sure everything turns. Everything's turning. But anyway, the power being wrong, it fried the unit. So that's why I like to invest in parts houses if they're affordable. Excuse me, affordable being I'm not going to pay full price for a broken house. I'm going to check the clearance on this to see if that slightly taller gear will fit. And how I do that is I'm going to put it together. And you can use tweezers, or if you have a set of thin, long needle nose like these, you can hold the gear and stick it inside and see if it'll fit in the gap. This will fit in the gap. It is maybe a 1/16 of an inch taller, but 1/16 of an inch taller can cause binding, so you gotta check. Now, if the gear is too tall and it won't fit at all, you can use sandpaper and sand the gear down. You can use a Dremel. I would be really careful because you might throw the gear with the Dremel. So, what I need is, sorry, use this to press the gear on. You can also use a small jeweler's vise, which I've done that before. One of my previous videos actually unmounted it from my bench and pressed the gear on. If you have long enough pliers that you can work with, use those. You can use your fingers if you have the dexterity and the strength. And I'm probably just going to end up just pushing it through this way. There we go. I couldn't get it to start with my fingers. Now, this has a splined shaft, So the shaft has little grooves in it that are going to cut into that plastic gear. So it's going to get really hard to press together. There's a few ways of doing it. I've showed it in the past, but one way that I like doing it is if you have a pair of wire strippers. These wire strippers have holes. They're holes for cutting bolts and for looping wire. If you take the gear, the shaft, stick it inside the hole, like I'm going to probably use this hole here so it doesn't wobble, and then press down. It went in, but the bushing came out, so let's do that again. There's a bushing on this top pulley. There we go. So now it's pressed together. Now, if it's too tight, like mine is now, I pressed it a hair too far, which is very common. Use a small blade, or if you have one of the fine spudgers, which I had up here, right here, like this, just stick it in between the plastic and the gear and just twist it until you get a little bit of a space, and then check its rolling motion. Make sure that it's not too rigid and it spins. And if you pushed your pulley down, if you have a rigid spudger or a blade screwdriver, you can go in from here and do the same thing and twist and go out to the other side and twist, and that will lift it back into place. So, and then see if we can get this to line up. Like that, like that. So. It's not too difficult of a unit. The majority of the parts and even this big pulley is in the hobby kits. Now, if the pulley isn't the exact same size, you might have to get a slightly smaller belt, which means that the characters won't move as fast. Because the pulleys do come in hobby kits, but sometimes the pulleys are not exactly the same diameter. This pulley usually is. This guy fluctuates depending on the hobby kits. And I have a funny feeling that the belt is going to slip, because now that it doesn't have a broken gear, I can feel the resistance on this, and I don't think there's enough tension on that belt, but I'm going to rotate it by hand, make sure everything is turning and nothing is binding before we do the actual power. Let's see if the belt works or if the belt's going to slip, because this belt is really hard. It's not a pliable belt, and it's really stretched, but it's old. Yeah, the belt's just slipping now because there's friction on it. So let's see what I got for belts. So I have a belt kit, and then I have some loose belts from a previous kit. Here's one. That's why I don't have to open that baggie. I have you can see how much tighter that is. Alright, so it's not turning. So something's bound up. Just gonna, I might have over tightened some of these screws. Apparently the binding is down here on the bottom. Could have sworn it was working fine before I stuck the top on. So I'm going to see if I can realign the gears without fully disassembling it. I can see where it's binding. The shaft that transfers down is caught. I'm not sure why though. It's amazing how the simplest projects go south. Oh, it's not in its hole. It's amazing how the simplest projects can go south on you. So when you assemble these, there's the little holes for the shafts of the gears, and apparently, even though I spun it, the bottom hole is not aligned. It probably popped out of place when it went pop. It probably wasn't popping into its hole, it was popping out of its hole. That's why I always try to check it before. There we go. So this gear's transfer was sitting on the lip. As soon as I relieved the tension of this pushing down on it when I took these screws, and now spins freely. So let's put this back down. Make sure everything's good. Good. Make sure this is good. That's good. Apparently this bushing is also not centered. So let me fix that. What I'm doing is I'm using these as a pry to separate so I can get the bushing to go back in. And I'll just take it off so I can show you what I'm referring to. It'll make life a little easier. So some of these on these big pulleys, not all of them, they put a spacer bushing in here, and the spacer bushing is pressed into the plastic. So the end of the shaft right here, we have a spacer bushing. What this bushing does is it keeps this shaft centered in the plastic base, and if it goes out of whack, it wears out the bushing versus the plastic housing, and it's pressed in, and apparently it doesn't like to stay pressed in, and it went at an angle. So now I got it squared, and now I just need to set the shaft. The shaft is too high, so I need to push the shaft down. There we go. Just shows you, even if you double check your stuff, sometimes it shifts out of alignment. Now I just need to press that gear back on, and then press the pulley back on, and it should be good at that point. There we go. Alright, so the gear is now reseated. Now I'm going to press on the pulley, which the pulley I'm going to try and line up the spline that's already been cut into it to make it slightly easier. And there we go. Now we just need to set the height down a little more, like that. There we go. Trial and error. Perfect. So even as many times as I do this, sometimes things don't go right or you make mistakes. It happens. So if you're doing it, just double check your work. I always double check mine before I assemble it, because sometimes on reassembly it does fall out of alignment like it did for me and cause you some issues. Check the tightness of your screws. If your screws are backing out, you can put a drop of hot super glue. Not a lot. You don't want to accidentally glue something together. There we go. Got that to go in. If your standoffs are cracked, I've showed this before. Like I said, I'm not going to fix that one because it's just a spinning shaft. But let's say these screw standoffs are cracked. Put super glue in the hole and let it harden, or just before it gets completely hard, run the screw in. It'll act like wood filler does. Alright, there we go. You can do hot glue too. I just use super glue because it's a harder material. It'll bond better to the plastics.
Everybody's favorite, where's my mummy? Our next contestant is a real pain in the neck. That's right, Count Dracula himself. Ladies and gentlemen, it's time for the...
Just turn that off so I don't have to hear the... So the witch does spin in a circle, and the outer two do move left and right. This one was just a gear and a loose belt. And that stupid bushing has lifted again. There we go. Make sure it doesn't lift. There we go.
Ladies and gentlemen, it's time for the Spooky Town Costume Contest. Let's hear it for Witch the Witch.
All right. So I think we're good. Just put the screws back, the top plate back on, and put the screws in for the speaker. Let's put this top plate back on. Assemble it and see how it works with it inside of itself. And I'll show you that crack I'm referring to in the resin. And one more. There we go. And You can re-hot glue your piece in, or you can melt the existing glue. And it's actually pretty rigid. I'm surprised. Probably going to have to clean off the glue residue because mine is in the way. Stuff like this stops it from going in. I think the rest is all clean. Now let's see if it'll slide back in. There we go. Now if you're going to glue it in, make sure that your 3 holes are lined up so they protrude through like so before you glue it in, because it's not square to the bottom. So if you glue it in square to the bottom, it's not going to work. And it's also recessed, which is odd. Usually they're relatively flush. So it looks like I'm going to have to hold the bottom in while we test it through the holes. So, put the vampire over here. Wendy the Witch in the middle. Like so. And the mummy right there. Hopefully you can see that she is slowly rotating. And that the mummy and Dracula are also swinging back and forth. So if I let go of the base, because it's recessed about a little over 1/8 of an inch, it'll fall through and the characters will unconnect themselves from the bosses that are making them move. So you can see it's working. Now, I'm going to pop them back off so I can show you what I was talking about. You probably thought I forgot. Honestly, I did. No, I wanted to make sure that everything was good. So, what I was talking about the crack is, if you look right there, you can see the fracture. But on the bottom, it's really obvious. Yeah, see that big old crack right there. So, if your resin is cracked, this is where the porcelain versus the resin versus the plastic all comes into play. Porcelain's harder to fix, and usually once you crack porcelain, it continues to crack. Resin, you can clean that with alcohol and you can fill it with super glue, as an example, and fill that crack in from the bottom, and it will slow it down. It's a little harder to stop the crack. To stop the crack, you take a small drill bit and you drill a hole at the end of the crack. And the reason I say super glue is you want something that bonds hard. Hot glue, as you saw how easy it is to peel off when it gets old. Super glue gets brittle, but it still has a stronger bond than hot glue when it gets older. So I would go with the super glue. Once it's filled, if you have any of it up here, you can paint it. Super glue paints easier in small quantities than hot glue. So if you have a little super glue that comes out of this crack up here, you can try and match this deck. Or you can weather the whole thing. You know, it's outdoors, maybe the wood isn't so brilliant. You want to add some brown or black dry brush techniques to make it look weathered, and you won't even notice the crack. Or, you know, once good old Dracula's in here, you don't really see the crack because his base is so large that the corner of it covers the edge of the crack. So it's just a personal preference. That is one way to repair these resin houses. Porcelain cracks have a tendency to keep spreading. You can try and drill a hole in the end of it, but you need a bit that can cut through porcelain, or ceramic, which is normally a carbide or diamond bit, and they're not cheap. And if you go at the wrong speed, too slow or too fast, the vibration can actually shatter the house or make the crack expand a lot further. This, being resin, or the plastic houses, you can fix the crack with a standard sharp drill bit, not a wood bit, but a standard sharp metal bit. You could use a carbide bit. Don't use a concrete bit. You just break this. Or you could just fill it with the super glue, let it harden, and if you're not jostling this around or storing it in a place where it has temperature fluctuations, hot, cold, the crack won't spread. So if it's stored in a climate-controlled area, whether it be your house or a climate-controlled facility, you should be fine. But here's the costume contest. It's a very simple one to take apart. You don't have to tear the bottom off like I did. Again, I did not buy this to display. I bought this specifically for parts. So if you have this and it needs parts, I have parts as an example. I don't have the spires that go here on these three, and this one's been re-glued on by somebody. But let's say you have this and one of these signs is missing. I can take the glue, break the glue free with a heat gun, and we got a sign for you. Or this row of 6 LEDs doesn't work. Oh yeah, I meant to show you the circuit board. I might have saw it was upside down. So we'll pop that back out. And there's the circuit board. And the LEDs are just soldered in these pads right in here. So you can unglue it, remove it, fix the LEDs, and put it back in. And this carpet, which is your back here, this fabric, if you don't like the color, change it. It's just held in with glue around the edges. So if you want to make it purple or black instead of the red, I'm all for making things your own. I know Lemax is against you modifying their products, but once you buy them, they're yours. You're not renting them. So like me, I wouldn't go with the red. This would be like a black or a purple fabric versus a red fabric back here. They probably did the red fabric to match the painted red curtains here. There's a lot of people out I see that do really cool paint jobs on these pieces to make them look more weathered or more realistic. So that is an option. But that was how to open up the Lemax costume contest for 2006. 16-year-old piece right now. And all the gears except for two. The gear that drives the witch in the front here and the eccentric are in standard gear kits. When you buy them, they come with all these gears. Like this is the gear that is the transfer on the 3rd level. So with the nose, because it has a nose on it, it's a standard hobby gear kit. The eccentric brakes, because the eccentric has a hole like right here with a screw and a standoff going through it, you can glue the standoff on, and there's enough space underneath it if you put a small machine screw, such as from a computer or the micro machine screws, which I don't think I have any around to show you. You don't. You can put a small locking nut on the bottom, a nylon locking nut, and you can put a dab of super glue on it because the screw doesn't turn. It's the plastic in the middle that it pivots on, and you can rebuild it, kind of like I did on the Ghoulish Gourd, where I was able to fix the pivot point on the one pumpkin. You can do the same thing on that eccentric gear because there is space on both sides, because the gear is only this thick and it has standoffs to lift the gear up off the base of the unit. So there are ways to fix things if you look at them. You can recreate the OEM stuff, and in some cases you can make it stronger. You know, like putting a screw straight through it would be stronger than relying on a piece of plastic that is molded with a screw threaded into it. There's less strength there, especially when it gets to this age at 16 years. But that would be this piece. That is, again, the costume shop, how to open the bottom. You don't have to be as destructive as me. And how to remove it and go through the layers. And the belt kit, which I should still have a link for. I'll put it in the video description below. The belt kit is a belt kit from for rebuilding stereos with cassettes, CDs, and 8-tracks, believe it or not, and phonos, records. It's a generic belt kit for old school stereos that aren't digital. And those belt kits come with belts as small as like 1.5 inches diameter, all the way up to about 6 inches. The 6-inch guys aren't very common on Lemax. Mr. Christmas, they're the right size, but they're too thin, so they stretch too much. But you can double or triple them up. I just go and get another set of belt kits. I try to link all the parts that you may or I do use to fix these. So I'll try and link the belt kit, a gear kit, the motor, which is a standard motor. So, but other than that, thanks for watching. Until the next one we tear apart and fix, have a good one.